February 12th, 2013 meeting of the Finance Committee of the City Council of Santa Barbara will now come to order. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on topics not on today's agenda but within the jurisdiction of this committee? Sensing nothing but ennui, we will continue to the first budget item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. If it's okay with the committee, we just want to go in order and start with the item one, loan subordination.
Yes.
And Mr. David Rao will be taking that.
Very good.
Good afternoon, Chairman Francisco and Finance Committee members. This is a recommendation that the Finance Committee consider and recommend to Council they approve a request for Habitat for Humanity to subordinate 2 city loans so they can obtain new bridge financing in the amount of up to $750,000 from the Housing Trust Fund of Santa Barbara County. Habitat is currently developing a new 12-unit, low-income, affordable ownership project located at 822 to 824 East Cannon Perdido Street. When construction is completed, the project will provide safe and affordable housing for 12 low-income families. Habitat is currently the only organization in Santa Barbara that develops low-income ownership housing. This is their 3rd project in Santa Barbara. Successful projects are located at 3965 Villa Lucero and 618 San Pascual. In December 2010, the former RDA provided housing set-aside funds to Habitat in the amount of $925,000 to purchase the property. In May 2012, the city provided a home loan in the amount of $515,000 for direct construction costs. The loan requires construction begin on the project no later than June 1st, 2013. The total cost to develop the project is estimated at $3,815,500. The total financing on the project is $2,190,000, including the proposed HTF bridge loan of up to $750,000. The balance of the project financing will come from Habitat's extensive fundraising efforts, revenue from their restore, and loan repayment from residents that are in the 2 completed Habitat's projects. From these sources, Habitats has averaged $625,000 of fundraising per year over the past 5 years. Of course, this doesn't include the value of the hours of donated labor by both homeowners and community volunteers. To expedite the start of construction, which in turn will encourage more donations, the Housing Trust Fund of Santa Barbara County has offered to provide Habitat a bridge loan in the amount of up to $750,000. HTF requires that the city agree to subordinate its existing financing to the new $750,000 bridge loan for a period not to exceed 3 years. The HTF loan has a fixed interest rate of 3.75% and is structured similar to an equity line of credit. The minimum monthly payment is interest only based upon the principal drawdown to date, and it's Habitat's intent to draw funds only as needed and to repay principal and accrued interest on a monthly basis. The principal balance with accrued interest, if any, is due in 3 years or prior to the sale of the completed individual homeowner units, whichever comes first. Upon completion of the project, all 12 of the project's units will be offered for sale and sold exclusively to low-income purchasers. Both the Finance Committee and City Council previously approved the sale price calculation and permanent financing provided for the 12 units. In addition, the initial sales price of each unit is subject to approval of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It's important to note that the city's affordable covenant will not be subordinated to the proposed HTF loan and will have a term of 90 years. Habitat has raised approximately 50% of the funds required for this project. Subordination to the HTF loan will expedite construction, and in Habitat's experience, donations increase when donors see construction is progressing. In addition, given the dissolution of the RDA, utilizing the Housing Trust Fund financing to assist in the delivery of affordable housing is a viable alternative that may become a model for future projects. This project is a magnificent demonstration of what housing partnerships can accomplish because it provides safe and affordable ownership housing for 43 low-income people, which includes 20 children. This request requires no additional city funding and does not change the terms of the former RDA acquisition loan or the home loan financing. This is the conclusion of my presentation. I'd like to point out that in the audience we have Jan Hubble from Habitats and Jennifer McGovern from the Housing Trust Fund. And Jennifer is going to give us a brief summary of the Housing Trust Fund. So if you'd like to come up and...
Thank you very much, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Jennifer McGovern, and I'm President and CEO of the Housing Trust Fund of Santa Barbara County. And we are a countywide private nonprofit financing group, and we have been certified as a Community Development Financial Institute by the U.S. Treasury. And our funds come from a variety of sources. We receive private lender investments, foundation investments, federal and state grants for funding our different affordable projects. And we operate two main programs, a revolving loan fund that provides low-cost loans to projects such as the Canon Perdido condominium project by Habitat. And these are typically shorter-term loans, up to 3 years. We now can go 5 years with some bridge financing loans on that. And they revolve back into the fund, and then we relend the funds to other projects. And then we've just started a new down payment loan program for first-time home buyers in North County. And we'll be bringing that program to Carpinteria in March, and hopefully expanding it to the South Coast in this next year. So that's kind of an overview. We have a very highly experienced board of directors. People like former council member Roger Horton is on our board, Rob Pearson, executive director of the City Housing Authority, Michael Tobes, the local banker, developer, and philanthropist, David Anderson, former trustee of the Santa Barbara Foundation, Twain Holmdahl, former county supervisor. So it's a really great group, and our goal is to try to help these kinds of projects move forward, and we're very delighted to partner with the city on this project.
Good. Thank you, Ms. McGovern. Any questions from committee members? Thank you.
Well, we're happy to answer any questions you might have at this time.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What's the square footage of the Habitat project? We don't know.
Maybe she probably has a better answer.
Hello, I'm Jan Hubble with Habitat for Humanity on the board of directors. The unit sizes range from about 800 square feet to about 1,300 square feet. We have 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So the total square footage is probably right around 12,000 square feet.
Okay. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
No questions? We do need a motion.
May I? I move that we recommend to the council approval of this request to subordinate the loans and help this project move forward.
Second.
Very good. And I just want to say, for the benefit of the public, this is a fairly standard procedure that we've done with these kinds of loans in the past, and the city's money is in no danger here. So, if there's no further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay. On to our next topic.
So our next topic is the mid-year review, and I wanted to just to say that this will be Jill Tara's last time presenting to the committee and council, and just wanted everybody to know that we're going to really miss her. She's been an amazing asset to the community and our city, and we all wish her well. City Glendora as finance director. And then, as we usually do, Jill will be talking about the revenues for the general fund, and then we'll turn it over to Julie Nemus, our new accounting manager, who I'm not sure all of you know, but she started about 8 weeks ago. And so she'll be covering the general fund expenditures and the enterprise funds.
Very good. Ms. Tara, I just want to start out by saying that I'm sure City Council shares Mr. Samario's sentiments, and we wish you luck.
Thank you, Chair Francisco, committee members, and thank you, Bob, for those kind words. I'll start with the general fund tax revenues today. We'll go through the results. Here we are halfway through the fiscal year, here with our mid-year financial review. And really, we have 6 months under our belt, and at this point, we can begin to make projections about where we think we'll end the year, given that we're halfway through the year. So we'll look at how we're doing, or how we did through December 31st, and then I'll give you an update about where we're expecting to end the year with our revenues, but it is good news this year. So we'll start, and as you can see, the year-to-date received over in the third column, we've received 44.4% of the taxes, the major tax revenues listed up above, compared to our 3-year benchmark average of what we usually collect in the first 6 months of the year, which is 42.9%. So we're doing a little bit better, and good news in virtually all of the revenues. First, we'll look at sales tax. We've received just under 40% halfway through the fiscal year, in line with a little bit ahead, actually, of the 3-year benchmark average. You'll recall from the Revenue News update that I send out each month the payment that we received in December for the quarter ended September grew 5.2%. And the growth estimate that we put in the budget for this year was 4%. So that's ahead of budget. We anticipate not to get 4% for the remaining 3 quarters, but we're thinking, based on the first quarter results and the information we have on the local economy, we'll probably hit about 4.5% growth. If that holds, that should put us about $430,000 over budget by the end of this fiscal year in sales tax. As our second largest tax revenue, a very important source of revenue for the city, that's good news on that point. I will note that that still puts us back at the sales tax that we collected in 2006. So there's still recovery in this particular revenue item, unlike some of the others. Moving on to property tax, you can see we're almost 3% above the 3-year benchmark average, with 38.6% collected through the end of December. There's a couple things at play here. One, the growth on the assessed property taxes for the secured and unsecured property grew 2.2% versus the 1.5% that we assumed in the budget. So our base property tax is growing better than we thought. We're also going to realize a one-time payments, which represent the redistribution of former RDA and former RDA housing assets. Those assets that we had to send back to the county will be redistributed to us. Our share will be just a little bit over $2.2 million. Which will be one-time money that we'll get this year, and we're expecting property taxes to end the year about a total of $2.6 million ahead of budget. But the bulk of that is a one-time windfall at the expense of RDA. TOT, as you know, has fully recovered from the declines, the steep declines we saw in the recession. There's a couple things that play into the TOT recovery. One is we've seen occupancy go up, and as occupancy goes up, so do room rates. So we get a double whammy effect, either up or down, and TOT, while much more elastic, certainly when it goes back up, it recovers more quickly. At halfway through the fiscal year, we've collected approximately 59% of the budget, ahead of the 3-year benchmark average. And year-to-date growth on an accrual basis is 7.1% versus the 6.1% we assumed in the budget. So even this revenue is doing a little bit better than we thought. We anticipate if our growth assumption holds through the end of the year, we should end the year about $217,000 ahead of budget. So another surplus in this item, this particular tax revenue. UUT is one that, I come and I tell you how difficult it is to predict, particularly for the different sectors, but we are seeing some declines in both the gas and electric sectors. We're a little bit behind the 3-year benchmark average. We do expect to end the year slightly short of budget, but we'll have a better handle on that in the next couple months when we see how the revenues come in and we prepare our final revenue forecast for inclusion in the budget that's filed in April. So more to come on that one. Business license, 37.9% has been received to date through December. There's a couple things at play there. I'm not concerned about this revenue at all for a couple of reasons. One, we had a new state law that mandated a $1 disability access fee on business license, and it was adopted very quickly by the state and implemented right away, and our December billing went out a couple weeks late, and so we haven't seen the revenues come in from the normal billing, as well as most of the renewals go out in January. So this revenue is expected to exceed budget by the end of the year. We're still trying to nail down the forecast on that, and it's certainly been helped by the comprehensive business license audit program that we've done this year that has brought many businesses into compliance with the city's business license tax code that didn't know or hadn't bothered to file for a business license. And the last one, property transfer tax, while not a huge revenue source for the city, I wanted to put it on because it's a good news item. You can see that our annual budget is $356,000. Year to date, we've received 75% of that. We had several big properties sell in December in Santa Barbara, and so we received about half of that in the month of December. We're estimating that that revenue alone will come in at about $600,000 by the end of the year if we see it return to just the normal growth rate. So that's good news too. We'll move on now to fees and service charges. And as you can see in the year-to-date received down at the bottom, at halfway through the fiscal year, we've received over 51% of the revenues that are budgeted, totaling $9.5 million. And all the departments are coming in at or expected to slightly exceed budget by the end of the year. The one thing I wanted to point out is you'll see that the library department is slightly behind the year-to-date received at 50% of the year, and that's simply a timing issue with the county admin fee. That did come in early January, and so library will be fine. We'll look now at the grand totals. If we look at the taxes, as I discussed previously, when you combine all the surpluses that we're anticipating based on the performance at halfway through the fiscal year, we expect taxes to come in right around $3.47 million over budget. So certainly good news that we got a handle on the budget and did a good job. You will recall that about $2.2 million of that is due to the one-time payment from the former RDA assets being redistributed. Julie will go through in a minute. She has a number of mid-year adjustments that departments have requested for items that were unanticipated when we put the budget together, and so she'll go through those. There's only one for the general fund related to the library department. It's a $27,000 revenue adjustment, and so that has a net zero impact. So we're expecting to end the year for the general fund revenues at $109,700,000 ahead of budget by $3.47 million. At this point, I'll turn it over to Julie, who will go through the results of general fund expenditures halfway through the year, and then she'll discuss some of the key points in the enterprise funds, and then she'll finish up with a discussion of the proposed mid-year adjustments that will be before council later today for action. Okay. Thank you.
I have
Thank
a
you, Ms.
question, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Ms. Murillo.
Ms. Tara, in the slide before this one, the variance to prior under interfund is negative 23.9%.
Yes.
That just seems like a big number. Can you explain that?
It is a big number. One of the, let me focus you on the third column, which is the year-to-date percent received. We've received over half of that revenue in halfway through the fiscal year. The reason you're seeing a huge negative variance to prior is that last year we budgeted that number much, much higher using some one-time monies to balance the budget. We don't have those in the budget this year. So really the variance to the prior year is not a meaningful comparison for this particular revenue. We're really just comparing to budget. And when you compare it to what we've got budgeted this year, we're on track. Yes, I believe it was the workers' rebate, workers' compensation rebate money that we used to balance the general fund in fiscal year 12. We transferred some of those reserves in. Those would have been in this category, and that's why we had much more last year in this category.
Okay.
Good afternoon, committee members. Now that Jill's gone through the general fund revenues, I'm going to be going over the general fund expenditures.
Could you please introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
My name is Julie Nemus. I'm the new accounting manager for the finance department.
Thank you.
This first table goes over the general fund expenditures for the 6 months ended December 31st, 2012. I'm going to be going through the individual columns as well as identifying some of the significant variances. First, I'm going to be talking about the adjusted annual budget. This is the adopted budget plus any appropriation carryovers from the prior year and any supplemental appropriations approved by council during the year. The total general fund expenditures as of December 31st amounted to approximately $106 million. Next column that we're going to talk about is the year-to-date budget. This is not just a 50% amount as of 12/31. What we did was actually adjust this for seasonality. It's a 3-year average of expenditures. So we looked at the 3 prior years and tried to take into consideration maybe debt service seasonality for expenditures that happen. Maybe some expenditures happen in the first 6 months or happen in the second 6 months. So we tried to factor that in to give you a better comparison. And then the year-to-date variance without encumbrances. We took encumbrances out, and then this is going to look at what the difference is between that year-to-date budget and your year-to-date actuals. Now I'm going to look at some significant variances. There may not be significant, but they may have some meaning, which I'm going to specifically talk about. I wanted to look at the city attorney specifically. Right now it's showing a negative variance of $22,000. This is primarily due to an unbudgeted vacation cash out of $27,000. We had some unbudgeted vacation cash outs that spanned across various departments. It was approved by City Council. It was not put in the budgets, but it is believed that the departments can absorb these cash outs and they have sufficient appropriations and other line items to cover that. So as of right now, we are not proposing any budget adjustments for them. But that is what a majority of this difference is related to, that one-time vacation cash out. There is also approximately $5,000 of office supplies that exceeded budget due to the city attorney's office improvement remodel project. However, the city attorney does believe there are 2 short-term vacancies occurring in the second 6 months that they think will offset a lot of this difference. So they believe by the end of the year they will be able to meet budget. So right now they're just going to monitor this for the next couple months and see if there's going to need to be any requests for additional appropriations at third quarter. The next one is fire. Right now fire is showing a negative variance of $217,000. Fire had several issues going on. There was a one-time vacation cash out that was actually for retirement. It was a vacation and a comp time cash out. There was also increased overtime costs. They had some, as compared to prior year, they had a lot more sick time, more just time taken by regular employees. And what happens is they have to have employees obviously fill that time. That results in more overtime costs. So they did have more overtime costs. There was about $113,000 of additional overtime costs above the salary savings for 7 vacant positions. Additionally, there was mutual aid expenses that were exceeded what was budgeted for mutual aid. However, on the other end of that, there is additional mutual aid revenues that almost entirely offsets those additional expenditures. So that's a little misleading because it's on both ends, on the expenditure side and revenue side. So if you take out the mutual aid expenditures, since there's an offsetting revenue, they do believe they're going to be able to hit their expenditure budget by year end. But this is another area that they will be closely monitoring their expenditures, and they may have to come back and request an appropriations adjustment at third quarter. But as of right now, they do believe they'll be able to meet their expenditure budget by year end.
A question about that. You said that part of this was a large vacation or sick leave cash out. How large was that?
It was $54,000.
And for how many employees?
It was a one employee for
Okay.
retirement.
Okay.
So it was a one-time for one employee.
Okay. Thank you.
So I guess it's not huge, but it was about $54,000. The next one was Parks and Recreation. Right now they're showing a negative $192,000 variance. This was for two reasons. There was also approximately $96,000 vacation cash out that was related to that one-time vacation cash out that was approved by council. This wasn't for a retirement. So there were various employees involved in that vacation cash out of $96,000. They also had higher utility costs, and that was directly related to they had higher program demand. There was good weather in the first 6 months. They had higher program needs, so they had higher utility costs to meet those needs. So that's why they're showing higher expenditures for Parks and Recs. However, staff does feel that in the last 6 months of the year, they're not going to need to have as many. The utility costs will equalize. They'll go down. They'll be able to meet their expenditures for the year. They don't feel like they're going to go over budget by year end. But they'll also be watching it over the next couple months just to make sure. Community development. Right now they're showing that about a $99,000 negative variance. This is actually due to timing. This is 100% due to timing. In the Arts Advisory Program, there's a contract with the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission, and 92% of that was paid out by 12/31, and that does not coincide with the prior year, so that's why that variance exists. So it's purely timing, and it will equalize by year end. Community promotions. This is also a timing issue. In the prior year, we make quarterly payments to the Conference and Visitors Bureau, so there's 4 payments a year. In the prior year, there were 2 payments made by 12/31. This year, they invoiced us a little early, and we paid it in December prior to going on the holiday leave. So it shows 3 payments. That payment was $337,000, and that explains the variance. Does anybody have any questions on any of the departments before I move on?
Mr. White?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't get the vacation cash out on Parks and Rec. That was how much money and how many employees?
It was 96,000. I actually don't have the number of employees, but it wasn't one employee. It was a number of employees.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. So overall, I just wanted to make a note that in total, it does show that expenditures, actuals compared to year-to-date budget, were negative or exceeded budget by $833,000. But that doesn't mean that they're actually going to exceed it for year-end, that we're predicting they're exceeding it for year-end. A lot of these are timing differences. Specifically, community promotion, that entire amount is a timing difference. Same with community development is a timing difference. So we do feel that the departments will meet their expenditure budgets right now as of year-end. There are a few departments like fire and parks and recs, city attorney, that will be monitoring their budgets very closely to make sure no additional appropriations will be needed. But as of right now, we do feel they'll meet their expenditure needs or meet their expenditure budgets by year end.
Okay.
I'm going to go on to the enterprise funds, revenues and expenses for the 6 months ended 12/31. The annual budget is same thing as we talked about with the general fund. It is the adopted budget plus appropriation carryovers and supplemental appropriations approved by council during the current year. The year-to-date budget, we also adjust for seasonality, both on the revenue side and on the expenses side, just because there's similar to expenses where we have certain expenses that occur in the first 6 months or don't occur in the first 6 months. We have the same situation with certain revenues. They might be higher in the first 6 months like due to weather, we might have certain departments or certain funds that have higher revenues in the first 6 months. So we adjusted both revenues and expenses. And then the year-to-date variance is the year-to-date actual as compared to the year-to-date budget. I'm going to now go into some of the significant variances. I'm basically going to focus on the ones that had a negative variance, but I'm happy to go in and talk about any of the other ones if you'd like to. Water Fund has both a positive, has exceeded their revenues and has also exceeded their expenses, so I am going to talk about specifically about Water Fund. The Water Fund has about $1.6 million in revenues that exceeded the year-to-date budget. This is largely due to higher water sales due to higher demand during the dry season. The first 6 months of the year was very dry. It was warm weather. There wasn't a lot of rain. The water sales were really high, and that resulted in about $1.6 million in additional sales. The staff do believe that sales will go down for the second half of the year. However, they're predicting revenues to exceed budget by the end of the year by approximately $800,000. Expenses, it's directly related to the increase in water sales. Because there's more water sales, there's going to be related expenses that need to be expended just to meet the demand. Those relate to chemicals, supplies, so their expenses increase so that they can meet the demand for the water sales. The next variance I want to talk to, the next fund I would like to talk about is the Golf Fund. The revenues have exceeded budget by about $45,000. I know you're familiar with over the last few years the Golf Fund has seen, and just nationally we've seen a downtrend in golfing, and the Golf Fund has seen some revenues, not meet budget in the past, but the revenues are doing better this year. However, staff does predict that there will be some greens fees that will not meet budget by year end. There's approximately $45,000 they feel by year end that will not meet budget in greens fees. However, they do feel this will be partially offset in an increase in concession fee revenues of about $22,000. So we're looking at a difference of about $23,000 by year end in revenue shortfalls. Expenses, right now, currently their expenses are over budget by almost $70,000. There is a $13,000 vacation cash out in here that's related to the ones that cross departments, and I believe there's 2 people in there, but I'm not positive. We also have all the equipment purchases were in the first half of the year, so that's a timing issue. So whereas in prior years, all the equipment purchases may have been throughout the year, they did all their purchases in the beginning of the year. And they also had higher water costs. Just with the dry season in the first 6 months of the year, their water bills were much higher. So they had some additional costs related to providing, watering their courses. So that's why their expenses were a little bit higher. They are predicting they're going to need an additional $10,000 in maintenance in the second half of the year. So they are making a conscious effort to reduce advertising costs up to $20,000 to offset some of these expenses. But this is one of those funds that is closely being monitored to see if there's going to be a need for additional appropriations by third quarter. So they will be closely watching this fund. Right now, they feel that by reducing some expenditures and other line items, they'll be able to meet their budget by year end, but it will be monitored very closely. The waterfront, right now the revenues are exceeding budget by $284,000. Stearns Wharf and Harbor Food Service have both exceeded their targets, and that led to increased revenues. They also have higher parking revenues. They think this is largely related just to the better weather, the warm weather. They have a lot more people coming in parking. Marina management revenue is higher. They've had higher slip transfers and visitor fees. Also, they feel due to the warm weather. And they feel that by year end, their revenues will exceed budget close to $300,000. Now, their expenditures right now are currently exceeding budget by $164,000. This is a timing issue. There's more debt service payments in the first half of the year this year than there was in the prior year. So this will equalize by year end. Any questions? Before I move on to the proposed mid-year adjustments, does anybody have any questions on the enterprise funds?
No.
No? Okay, great.
Please continue.
Thank you. So now I'm going to get into, we have quite a few proposed mid-year adjustments this year, so I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I'd be happy to stop. If you want me to stop and explain any more, please just ask. So we only have one general fund adjustment, as Jill mentioned earlier, and that's in the library. The library received 2 additional donations or increase in donations, Friends of the Library, and a grant for literacy support for $27,996 total. They are projecting they'll need to spend $10,000 of that on book acquisitions. They wanted to true up their line items and true up their expenditures and revenues for what they were receiving. They're not sure if they're going to be spending all of that by year end. They're going to be looking at it third quarter to see whether or not they need to appropriate the rest of those revenues. But in the future, they may not always have to true up their budget for those line items. But right now, they're guessing that they may have to actually use that money at third quarter, which is why we're proposing to increase budgeted revenues at this time. That's the only general fund adjustment. For the special revenue funds, we have additional library adjustments for the county library fund. We are showing additional donations and bequests and City of Solvang funding amounting to a total of $28,917. These relate to Goleta, Solvang, and Montecito. They're using about almost all of this. They would request appropriations for, and that's going to be for materials, book acquisitions, and staffing. Specifically, City of Solvang and some donations. They are coming in just to provide staffing to keep the library open certain hours. For the Successor Agency Fund, this is specifically related to a fee that the Successor Agency gets. It's a 3% admin fee to administer the Successor Agency. There's a $250,000 minimum. Right now, the minimum is $250,000. They were approved an additional $95,000 for the second half of the year. So they're requesting an increase in appropriations and a corresponding increase in revenues, and a corresponding increase in appropriations for $95,000. And that's what that.
Mr. White.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I don't understand that. The $250,000. Can you?
That's the minimum fee that they can be granted to administer the Successor Agency. And they actually got approved for a higher fee for the second half of the year, which amounts to an additional $95,000.
I guess I'm not really clear there either. I don't understand the connection.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's not really so much a fee per se, as you know, when the Successor Agency has some administrative costs, city staff time, attorney costs, and even their own legal counsel. And the state, as part of the law, allows the Successor Agency to receive up to $250,000, at least a minimum of $250,000 for administrative costs. But it's also based on what your actual recognized obligations are. So it's either $250,000 or 3% of your recognized obligations, whichever is higher. And so when we put together the budget this year, we didn't know what we would have. So we budgeted the minimum. And in reality, we ended up having more recognized obligations. So when you applied 3% to that, it worked out to be $95,000 or more that we could spend, because we do have actual costs that exceed $250,000. So we're just adjusting the budget to reflect additional costs, which is closer to 3% of our recognized obligations.
So does this have to do with redevelopment agency projects for the library?
No, this is the Successor Agency fund.
Oh, okay.
So this is
Separate. Okay, gotcha,
outside of
gotcha.
the county
Okay.
library.
I missed
This
that
is-
transition there.
Yeah, it's a separate fund.
And Mr. Chair, so that means 340 thereabouts.
345 is the total amount that we're allowed now.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, I forgot to do that. Sorry, I forgot my boxes. Sorry about that. Moving on to the streets operating fund. There's my box. We had several adjustments. We went in and staff actually went in and did some work with the projects and actually wanted to allocate closed projects, allocate funds to projects, and do some cleanup with projects. So that's what's going on with the streets operating fund. The first thing that happened was they sold a piece of property, the 309 West Ortega, property, and it was originally acquired with federal grant money for a bridge project. So the proceeds must be used for other federally funded bridge projects. So we're recommending that the $230,000 of the $392,000 that the property was sold for, so only a portion of it right now, actually will be used to increase budgets for these various projects listed below here. Chapala Street Bridge for 75, Mason Street Bridge 50, and then a new, this is a new project, it's post-bridge construction monitoring. That's $50,000. So that's about $175,000. Then there's $55,000, a little over $55,000 that we're recommending to transfer to Ortega Bridge to cover a revenue shortfall for some unallowed reimbursable costs, excuse me. So that actually got transferred to just below the Streets Grant Capital Fund. You'll see that first line says transfer from Streets Operating 309 West Ortega, and that just correlates directly to the line above on the Streets Operating Fund. Also in the Streets Grant Capital Fund, we're recommending to close Ortega Bridge at Mission and close Measure A. They're both completed projects that finished under budget, and they're being closed out. So these are cleanup of these two funds and some transfers.
Mr. White, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So money is gotten back from these from land sales that happen with these Mission Creek bridges. That money is then available for federal bridge project. Is that the, as I recall, there's a small percentage, was it 10% or 15% or something? 11, okay, 11.5. So does this money become that 11.5% for the next bridge? Wow. So once this starts rolling, it's just a pretty amazing
Yes, that's true. So
free ride.
that's exactly right. We pay a small share as it is. Our matching portion, as you said, is to think about 11.5, maybe 12%. So these funds can be applied to the city's matching portion.
All right, thanks. All right, moving on to the Water Operating Fund. And I'm going to talk about the Water Operating Fund along with the Water Capital Fund because they relate to each other. So it's both this first one and the second one. Public Works secured funding from a state revolving fund loan, which is a low-interest loan for water and wastewater infrastructure for the Ortega Treatment Plant project. And the operating fund originally funded the project from reserves to the capital fund. But now that the capital fund reserved actually got this loan, they're going to repay the operating fund. So that's what's going on right here. It really was just they were unsure whether they were going to get this loan, so they made the transfer, waiting to see if they were going to secure the loan. They did secure the loan, and now they're just transferring the money back. The next two funds, they're both related. It's a similar situation that was going on with the water operating and the water capital. So I'm going to talk about the wastewater operating as well as the wastewater capital. The operating fund transferred about $3 million to the capital fund in fiscal year 12 for a headworks screening project. Also, due to uncertainty regarding the state revolving fund loan, they did secure the loan in fiscal year 13, so they're transferring the money back from capital to operating. So that's what's going on. They're very similar situations. Downtown Parking Operating Fund. I'm going to talk about this one also when I talk about the Downtown Parking Capital Fund. There's one entry that correlates together. Well, they actually all correlate. But you'll notice the $367,000 lines up with the last entry, transfer from capital to operating. What we're doing in the Downtown Parking Capital Fund is we're very similar to what we did in the Streets Fund, is we're looking at projects that were completed, and we're closing those projects. So the first about 8 lines are closing projects that have completed, so non-building improvements. The second one is reducing a project. We left a little bit of money in there just to wrap up that project, but it'll be completed and closed this year. And the rest of them are all projects that are closing. And there was all of these capital projects have approximately $414,000 of leftover appropriations. So we're actually only transferring out, what you'll notice, is $367,000, not the full 14. We left $46,000 in there to actually resolve a deficit that's in the reserves in that account. and that relates to overruns in projects for many years. That something might have gone over budget for a few $1,000s in multiple projects. Amounts to about $46,000, and that's why we left that money in there to resolve that deficit. Transferred the rest back over to the operating fund.
So a question about this. This is not the same as the previous situations we saw with the water funds where operating funds had been allocated to capital expenses?
No.
So I can't remember the numbers, but I remember having seen reports on the unfunded future capital needs for the downtown parking. I don't quite understand the rationale for moving money out of capital into operating expenses if, as I think is true, we have future unmet needs in the capital budget.
Mr. Chair, I think it's just, they don't have anything sort of planned out, right now or this year. When they are putting together the next 2 years' budget, they're going to consider all the funds they have in reserves and revenues and then sort of plan out what they want to fund. We could have just easily left the money in the capital fund and then appropriated from there. But I think they just said, let's just close out the projects, transfer the money over, and then we can evaluate what we need the next couple of years and then transfer those monies and to fund those projects at that time. So it's part of the budget process.
So it's not necessarily the fact that there's a need in the operating budget for this money.
That's correct. It's going to go right back into the reserves, and then
Okay.
those reserves will be available for projects in the future.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. These are our last three recommended adjustments. The first two relate to each other. That's Airport Capital Fund and the Airport Grants Fund. In fiscal year 11, the Airport Improvement Program grant funds were not received in a timely manner. So they used funds from the Capital Fund to cover the airline terminal improvement project costs. So in October 2012, $750,000 in Airport Improvement Program funds were finally received in the Airport Grants Fund. So we're just recommending to reimburse the Capital Fund for the receipt of those funds. So that's what's going on between those two funds right there. And then our very last recommended adjustment is in the Intracity Services Fund for Fleet. In the first 6 months of the year, well, the first thing I wanted to point out, is that in the actual CAR and all the attachments, it says Fund 511. That should say 513. So I've corrected it on the PowerPoint. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that the fund number was incorrect in the actual agenda report, but it's correct on this PowerPoint. So in the first 6 months of the year, an airport rescue vehicle had a major malfunction, and it was unbudgeted. It wasn't part of the routine maintenance. It was $65,000, so we're recommending an increase in appropriations for $65,000 for that repair. And that would wraps up the mid-year review and all of our recommended adjustments, and I'd be happy to take any other questions you have at this time.
Questions from committee members? No. Mr. White? Mr. Samario, do we need a motion to recommend?
Please.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Nope. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
So we'll go through this with council, but a lot
Yes.
more abbreviated.
And we can vouch for the fact that this looks like it's all on the up and up.
You can recommend it. We shorten it even more if you like.
Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.